Welcome back to Business 101, Introduction to Business. And in this, our fourth lecture, we talk about a couple of different related topics in global business. As you can see from the title slide, this particular lecture, we're going to introduce the topic of trade balances and foreign exchange. Now remember, we began looking at the exploration of the question, what exactly is global business? And remember our answer? Our answer was, it's business, just complicated, right? Sort of like that status on Facebook. It's complicated. It's business complicated by a number of different complexities that you introduce into the equation as soon as you start buying or selling stuff from other countries. One of the things that countries keep track of is the overall trade balance. What is a trade balance? Well, you can see here, this is the US's, United States trade balance from roughly about 2006 to 2016 when the data on this table ends. And you can see there, it's plotting in the red the level of United States imports, in other words, products and services that we bring in from overseas and can buy and consume here in the United States, versus our level of exports, products and services which are made here in the United States and then we export out to other countries. The idea here of this chart is clearly what? We have more imports than exports in every year for those 10 years in this chart. And quite frankly, even before then, the level of imports has always been higher than the level of exports, at least expressed in terms of billions of dollars, the dollar value of the products and services imported or exported. And this is what we mean when we talk about trade balance. It's either a trade surplus or trade deficit. And a trade deficit is when a country's imports exceed its exports, creating what we call a negative balance of trade, which of course implies that if a country's exports exceed the imports, we would call it a positive balance of trade. Now, where do the terms negative and positive come from? Well, they come from an antiquated understanding, very old understanding of international trade, which essentially says if you are selling more stuff than you're buying, you end up wealthier at the end of the day. Versus if you end up buying more than you're selling, well, then you're going to end up owing somebody at the end of the day. Now, we have to say this is particularly true if you're talking about a single household, right? If as a single household you are spending to buy stuff more than you are earning by selling stuff, then eventually, yeah, if your spending outstrips your income, you're going to have problems. However, that understanding doesn't work when we talk about entire nations, because nations have ways of generating wealth other than simply selling exports, right? And so what our best understanding of this, of a trade deficit here in the United States, the fact that for years and years and years and years, we have always imported more than we've exported. Really, the best way to understand this culturally is simply that Americans love to buy our stuff. We love to buy stuff. We love to buy stuff so much as a consumer country, we can't get enough. We got to bring in stuff from overseas because we want to buy handbags from Italy and automobiles from Germany and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And therefore, the United States has always run since, well, quite frankly, since after World War II, we've run a trade deficit. Our imports exceed our exports. But that is something for a country to consider. And it is something we consider when we think about how healthy is the U.S. economy in terms of international trade. It is a complication, a complexity for us to understand and keep track of. As is the next set of complexities, which have to do with the fact that we who do business in a global marketplace have to consider the impact of fluctuations in currency exchange rates. What is an exchange rate? You can see it right there. The first bullet point, the rate at which the currency of one nation can be exchanged for the currency of another nation. Basically, international trade adds another layer of complexity simply because your dollar isn't always going to be worth your dollar. Now, what does that mean? Well, Consider this. If you are manufacturing products domestically and then exporting them, selling them overseas, you have suppliers and you have employees and you have labor that you have to pay in US dollars, correct? Because it's made here in the United States, right? However, if it's sold overseas, let's say it's sold in Japan, when those products are sold in Japan, what are you collecting? You're not collecting US dollars, you're collecting Japanese yen, which doesn't really do you any good until you repatriate and convert those back into US dollars in order to pay your suppliers, pay your workers, and repatriate the profits as, retained earnings to your corporation. Here's the deal. What happens if there is a fluctuation in exchange rates from the time that you produce the products till the time that you sell them, and your dollar is no longer worth $1 after you exchange it back to US dollars here in the United States? Then foreign exchange rate fluctuations may have impacted your profit simply in the act of trying to repatriate those dollars back to the United States to the country of origin. Now, that's the general principle of the complexities introduced by exchange rates. Realize, of course, this is very quickly can become a far more complex conversation when you talk about exchange rates at some indeterminate point in the future when you're going to try to bring those Japanese yen back to the United States, or vice versa, right? Depending on what your country of origin is and where the target marketplace ends up being. So this is a whole area of specialization and consideration that you need to have folks minding when you talk about estimating your required rate of return on invested capital. How much are you actually going to earn after you take those funds back as your local currency? Another layer of complexity to consider, this is of course one more reason why global business is complicated. It's complex. Why? Because there's always the national consideration of imports versus exports and our trade balance, as well as, very specifically, what will fluctuations in foreign currency exchange rates do to my costs, my revenue, and therefore my profit margins. Hope that's helped some. We'll see you in the next lecture.